Hi guys, it's been a bit of a difficult week for Reform UK and Nigel Farage. So there have been a number of by-elections where, well, they lost to the Liberal Democrats. There have been a number of individuals who have defected to Reform, but unfortunately some of those individuals have some dodgy backgrounds. And finally, of course, there's James McMurdock, one of their MPs, who has resigned the whip over some of his business dealings during the pandemic. Now, this is a major problem for Reform and for Nigel Farage, but let's hear a bit more about it from this report.
We first learnt of this when the party's chief whip, Lee Anderson, spoke about this on social media. Now, this relates to allegations that have now been published by the Sunday Times newspaper. Now, the allegations relate to two companies owned by James McMurdock and loans that they took out during the COVID pandemic from the government's bounce back loan scheme. That was a scheme to support struggling businesses during the pandemic. They say that the allegations involve loans worth a total of £70,000. Now, Reform UK says that Mr. McMurdock denies any wrongdoing. The party itself is not going to comment any further on the particular allegations, but we understand that an internal investigation has also been launched by Reform UK. That's going to be led by somebody outside the party and is expected to take at least a few weeks before we hear anything more from them on this.
Now, Reform have lost an MP previously, someone who resigned.
They have, yeah. When Reform fought the general election last year, they had 5 MPs elected. Rupert Lowe was one of those MPs who has since been kicked out of the party after an argument with Zia Youssef, who was the party chairman, then quit and has now come back in a slightly different role. They've, for the time being at least, now lost another MP. They did have Sarah Pochin elected during a by-election. But this does play into allegations against Nigel Farage's parties more generally that things have been a bit chaotic. And he himself, when questioned by me and by other journalists, has said that some of that chaos does need to be tempered if the party is going to be seen as a credible option for winning the next general election, which is what he wants and what the polls suggest is a real possibility.
Okay, so is it still a real possibility? Do you remember Sir John Curtis saying it's not guaranteed, there's a possibility, but it's diminishing by the day, actually. It seems, according to some polling, that Reform UK have peaked or that they're actually losing support to Labour. Now, the problem for Reform, and Nigel Farage in particular, is the type of people he attracts and Reform attracts. So they attract extremists on the right. So maybe people will call them far right, but I describe them as extremist on the right. Extremist on issues like immigration, on culture wars and stuff like that. Now, these are people who are not able to think before they speak. And they post all types of stuff on social media, which comes back to haunt them. But the problem also for Reform isn't just that they attract these types of people, also people with dodgy business dealings, but they don't have a vetting process. They don't have a system in place to filter out those individuals, because this is a huge disadvantage for Reform. Farage is trying to sell the public Reform as a viable alternative to the Conservatives and the Labour Party. And what they're doing at the moment is they're succeeding where Labour and the Conservatives are failing. They're not winning over a lot of people because they're a popular party. They're benefiting from somebody else losing. And they may succeed when it comes to winning a lot of seats by doing that, by using pretty much the same strategy as Keir Starmer did last year. Hope that people just hate the Tories enough that they'll vote for the Labour Party. And Reform may succeed when it comes to that. But you're going to have a lot of these problems because they don't have a vetting process and because Nigel Farage, at the end of the day, is running the party like a dictatorship, like a cult of personality. So it's very difficult to reform because Farage has the final say. It's not a party in the normal sense. And while you will see dodgy individuals joining the Conservative Party or joining the Labour Party or other parties, at least if you have a proper vetting process, you can filter out a lot of those, and those who do slip through the net, you can punish them pretty quickly. The problem for Reform is you're going to see so many people. Remember, we're at the very beginning of this. They are planning, or they hope, to have over 100 or 200 or even 300 MPs at the next general election. And they don't have a vetting process. So as we start to get closer to that election and you start to see candidates who are not properly vetted, you're going to see a lot of these problems. People who have posted racist stuff on social media, people who have been involved in business and doing some dodgy stuff. This is going to come back to haunt them. But as I said, there are two fundamental problems. One is a top-down organization where it's basically a dictatorship and no real vetting process, because if they had a proper vetting process, they would keep a lot of people out, but then they'd end up with no MPs because nobody would get through a decent vetting system. So while at the moment they're tipped to become the biggest party, I think the more we see of reform, the more they're exposed, the less likely they will be in power.